Breathing in diesel exhaust fumes is like walking into a fire without a mask. Over time, those toxins lead to cancer. Protect yourself with MagneGrip, the easiest, most reliable exhaust removal system that features a true 100% seal to eliminate diesel exhaust fumes. To get free grant assistance, visit MagneGrip.com.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dan Degryse, and welcome to Mental Health Monthly. This is a platform that Chief Rhodes gave myself and my co-host, Chris Muscle. I'm a retired battalion chief out of Chicago. I've been retired now 4 years, and I do a hump day hangout with Rob Fisher every fifth Wednesday of the month. This is another platform that fire engineering, again, David Rhodes offered myself, and I'm going to kind of introduce my co-host, Chris Muscle, and then let him kind of share a little bit about him, because we're coming from kind of two different generations. I was born in '64 and Chris in the '80s, and I'm a baby boomer and Chris is a millennial. Whatever that means to any of you, we're going to kind of have a conversation today about what the generations are in the fire service. I mean, fire service has been around for a long time, and it's going to be around for a lot longer too. And we're just going to have a conversation today about that and what it means then and now. Chris, where do we find you?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I live in Dallas, right outside of Dallas. I work here in the Metroplex. I spent 4 years in the Marine Corps Infantry. I've been a firefighter, paramedic, second department, two departments for about 15 years, and I also worked as a flight paramedic for a while. So,
yeah, for those of you that know me and or Chris or get to know us, back when I got on the job, you didn't have to be an EMT, you didn't have to be a medic. You were considered a first responder in a sense, whatever that means. And people call fire personnel first responders. But back in the 80s, we just had to put Band-Aids and splints and get people into the ambulance. That was what we did back then. Now, gosh, I tell you, what you all have to do from a training and education and deliverable is so far beyond what we ever intended. I think anybody from my generation would be like, holy cow, you're all doctors. I mean, we all called ourselves doctors back then, even if we just put a Band-Aid on somebody. But from a paramedic standpoint, Chris, you're a flight medic, right? So I don't even know what that means. I mean, you're in a helicopter, a helo, and I think you even did that in the military. You're by yourself or maybe with one other person with that person's life in your hand. I mean, you're basically, I'm going to call you a doctor.
yeah, I mean, that's kind of, and that was the thing with, as we evolve is, you kind of had the flight paramedics and the flight nurses, and that was kind of like the higher level of care. But what's crazy is that is transitioning into the fire department world, that higher level of medicine. And, maybe back in the day you went to paramedic school and it was one textbook, and now it's a stack of 7 books. And that also plays into the mental health, right? Because now these guys are holding themselves to a higher standard and they're expected to do more. And so maybe if they don't perform, or if I don't perform to the level that I thought I should, that creates some mental, psychological challenges, right?
Yeah, you mentioned that, and really my expertise was doing CPR, pumping a person's chest. And I would say going back to my first 10 times of doing CPR, I think all of them died or were dead. I learned in the academy that if you do CPR, you might keep them alive. I don't know if there's a thing called bringing them back, but that was pretty much my first experience with death, was CPR. And I think I remember going back to the firehouse. Oh, that didn't work. And now you're, again, just from an ability standpoint, one, you're so much capable when you show up on the scene to do so much more with all the equipment and the knowledge you have than I did 35 years ago from CPR, when you were waiting for the ambulance to show up, because there was no BLS and ALS rigs back then. But I wouldn't say we felt helpless back then, but it was just that all we were capable of doing. If we couldn't do it, we couldn't go beyond that, our scope of care. And from a mental health standpoint, it was like, oh, we lost another one. But it's different now with your skill level, right? It probably plays more on you because I would assume, and I've really never asked anybody this, but from your flight medic, because you're supporting the veterans back then, you're transporting them, and for the most part, you're transporting civilians now, but it's the same thing, life and death. You want to sustain life for that person. And if you don't, how do you wear that?
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because I think, like you said, we have more tools now. And so there's a two-part mental capacity to that of you have the tools, you have the knowledge, you have the resources. So you're expected to do more. And so when you do save somebody, that's a great feeling, right? But then when you don't, it hits a little harder than maybe it might have back in the day. Because you're right, back in the day, when you look at cardiac arrest statistics with that example, it just didn't save a lot of people. And now people are walking out of the hospital left and right from cardiac arrest.
What was that level back then? Like 5% or 10%?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very, very low number, as to where now the numbers are super high. And so when you don't save somebody, you're like, you almost expect to save somebody now because of the knowledge, the training, the equipment, the manpower, the response, all these times, right? All these things go into it. So now when you don't save somebody, maybe back in the day, it was like, well, even when I started 15 years ago, it was like, well, we didn't save that guy, but that's just what we're used to. As to where now it's like, well, wait a minute. Why didn't we save that guy? Did we not do something right? Did we not? Right. And then you have the second, what I like to think of as psychological piece of it is when somebody elderly passes, right? Maybe that's a little bit easier because they have lived a long life, whatever that looked like for them, right? You just expect older people to pass. That's the evolution of life. But it's when you have that younger person in their 20s, in their 30s, in their 40s, and what the science shows you is those people really should live, and then you don't save that person, and now that's when it becomes a struggle, and unfortunately sometimes you walk out of the hospital and you don't have time to process it or deal with it, because as you're getting back in the rig, the tones are going off for the next run. Right. And so then you start to compartmentalize and stack and stack and stack.
Yeah, not just EMS, but fire as well. When you look at the run totals for departments across the country, they just continue to go up. I mean, there's more people in the world, right? And so back when I got on the job, there were 250 million Americans in the United States. Now there's 340 million. There's more high rises. So there's definitely going to be more calls. I don't know if there's more fire personnel. And if we look at from a manpower, or so if I use the right terminology, struggling here with it. So sometimes people could look at manpower and go, okay, that's sexist. I won't get into all that, but personnel, right? The people that are there, staffing is probably a more appropriate word. So I'll use that. I know for us in Chicago, we had it in our contract. So there was a definitive number of staffing, but I know with brownouts and personnel that want the job and people moving around, the staffing levels are slim. The overtime is high. So not to make it, and again, our goal is not here to talk about the fire service as a bad career, but we're going to talk a little bit about what it takes to be somebody in the fire service and EMS world, and the totality of that, and what it takes from a mental health perspective, the totality and the intentionality, so that you can stay in the game, right? From a football standpoint, be in all four quarters. So from a personnel standpoint, you got 15 years, so you're right in the middle of a career. I always thought I spent 30 years. I was, again, middle of the road, 15 years. What's the quality of personnel that are coming on the job now from a skill level, from an EMS standpoint? We'll get into a fire side in a second, but from an EMS standpoint.
I think it varies depending on maybe the area that you're in. But I know certainly back when I got hired on the job, you had to be down here pretty much fully certified to get hired somewhere, unless you went to one of the bigger departments, right, in the area. As to where now you can't get people to come work for you, regardless of benefits, pay, staffing, equipment, whatever, right? And then I think that also translates to, why are people coming on the job now, right? Is the reason that people are signing up to do it today the same reason that guys like you and others signed up to do it 30 years ago? And there's certainly a difference there. And you're seeing.
Oh, so that's a great question. So I got on a job because I didn't want to be behind a desk. I ended up semi behind a desk as a battalion chief, but for the most part, firefighter, lieutenant, captain, you got to, as we would say, right, do it, right? Are you doing it?
Yeah.
We didn't get paid a lot back in the 80s, but we have a heck of a lot of time off. We'll get into that in a little bit, in the sense of what that causes to our relationships and our mental health. But I got into fire service because you got to ride the rigs, you were out in the street, you got to put out fires. And yeah, we had to do a couple of Band-Aid things back then. That was really what we did back then. Why did you get on the job?
Yeah. I mean, I think coming out of the military, right, I kind of grew up in the fire service a little bit, but coming out of the military, the fire service was obviously paramilitary. And, it was that high-speed energy, that adrenaline, that working in those austere conditions, right? And obviously genuinely being able to help somebody. I'll be honest with you, I really didn't know a whole lot about the EMS side of it. I wanted to be a fireman like every other guy. And then down here in Texas especially, it's very integrated, right? And so you might be on the ambulance one day, you might be on the fire truck the next day. And so that was another big learning piece of it. But I think that I obviously had a background of hard work and ethic. And even if I didn't, the military instilled that very quickly into me. And so I understood the passion and the reasons, and it wasn't necessarily the paycheck or the time off or things like that that drove that. What I didn't understand was all the different mental components that would come along with it, and the challenges and the trials and the tribulations.
Yeah, so you mentioned that, and I want to get to that in regards to the mental aspects of it, but I don't know if I allowed you to answer the question in regards to the skill set of the people coming on the job. I think you alluded to it. I know for lack of better words, the sample size, the number of people that are applying for the job is less and less.
Yeah.
I could get into the fact that when I applied back in '85, we had 45,000 people apply for the job in Chicago. I've talked to other departments that used to have 350, and now they're lucky to get 50 people to apply.
Yeah.
So I would think naturally that high level skill set. I think from a transferring standpoint, because that's happening more often, which didn't happen 30 or 40 years ago, people transferring from one department to another. But there's lateral transfers now, but from a skill set of coming on.
Yeah.
Same, less, or higher.
So I think it's definitely interesting. And I think, maybe back in the day, even when I started, which 15 years ago, not long ago, I think the skill set was on the EMS side of it was not something super hard to make it or obtain, right? Because medicine 15 years ago, the research wasn't there, the technology, the equipment, as to where now, like we alluded to earlier in the show, there's this high level of medicine and this high expectation. And I think that it plays in a sense to the new generation where, we're using camera technology and different technological pieces that, these younger guys are really good at because they grew up in an iPad era or an Xbox era or something like that. And so they adapt really well to that. But sometimes what I think is missing is the work ethic piece to put in the sweat equity to get to that point. And so I think what you see today, maybe even when I started 15 years ago, most people, they passed, right? Like, oh, they made it through their probation, EMS, whatever, as to where now you either make it or you don't. And it's very clear and it's very obvious. It's not like oh, well, this guy might make it. Like the expectations are higher and either they get it or they don't. And so I think it's a totally different type of medicine as to where, in the earlier years, it wasn't, I don't want to say it was a low level of medicine because that sounds bad, but you just didn't have all the modern day stuff that pushed it to the next level. And so it's interesting. It is. You watch the new guys come on the job and, maybe they're using an ultrasound or something and they pick up on that super quick, right? Because they grew up in that technology driven era. But then you watch them try to conversate with somebody on a 911 call and wow, that's where the challenge happens. So it's pretty interesting.
I remember asking the medics back probably about 15 years ago how long they were in class, because I learned that I think the paramedic class is somewhere around 13, 14, or 15 months now. I think back then it was 4 or 5 weeks. And I look at EMT, back when I took it a consolidated class, which was 4 months. I think some EMT classes are anywhere from 3 to 6 months. It's a lot of information. It's a tough test. Not everybody passes it the first time, but from a paramedic standpoint, again, I was not, and I was always impressed by people that can do that. It always amazed me because when I was a lieutenant and a captain and I was on an ALS rig and I had to be in charge of a paramedic, I'm like, they're not making me be a paramedic. I would have done it if they would have put me through class, but I just didn't want to do it on my own. That's my own thing. I should have been that level to supervise somebody that has a paramedic license. So that's my department, my form.
Yeah, I think the other thing that we'll talk about eventually too is, and it plays right into the generational thing, is the frequency of the high acuity runs you're going on. Whether it's a bad MVA, it's a bad EMS run, it's a house fire, high rise fire where you're pulling somebody out, right? As to where, like you said earlier, with the population just naturally increasing in the country, those different types of high acuity calls are becoming more and more regular, as to where maybe, 15, 30 years ago, you're like, oh, I might go on this bad wreck or I might go on this bad EMS call. And, when you did, you're like, wow, we went on that call. You're texting everybody, you're telling all your buddies about it, as to where now you come in at, shift change and they're like, oh, we had this bad call yesterday, example X, right? And you're like, oh, well, interesting, normal, right? And so that's a whole different piece to it as well. The exposure.
Yeah, again, so many more people and so many more distractions causing so many more wrecks.
Yeah.
And that means, like you just said, more exposure for the personnel that are on the job to respond to, which we don't want to be sitting in a recliner. We didn't get on a job to just watch TV and cook lunch and dinner. We got in a job to, as we said before, to do it, right? Did you do it? Are you doing it? Get in the game and be a part of it. But with that comes a lot of exposure to events that the average person doesn't. And I don't want to get there yet. I do want to talk about, again, the mental health aspect of it. But let's talk about something that people, like, from a generational standpoint. Now, we met about 4 or 5 years ago. And as I tell everybody, and there's a purpose for both of us to be on this show. Again, as we talk with people and have different guests on the show, is perspective, right? Because on a scene, we're all sizing up stuff, and people have a perspective from their position, from their background, from their training, and what I call self-efficacy, what they've been able to achieve throughout their career. And I'll ask you this question first, is, so you see a guy, and I'm 59, but you're 38, I believe, and you see a 55-year-old firefighter come into your fire station. What's your first thought? And not me, but just generationally.
Yeah. It's kind of two-dimensional, I guess. That guy's got some street cred, right? Some experience. I think that's the guy you probably want to follow into a burning building, right? But then the flip side to it is maybe that guy might not be as tuned up on the newer generational stuff that we're using, whether it's electronic equipment on an ambulance or, it's electronic equipment on a fire truck pumping a fire. He's old school, right? That's what we like to say. That guy's old school, right? And so you have to I look at it that way. I'm like, that's the guy I want to follow right there. That's the guy that I want to go to for advice, because he's probably been there before. But then you also know that maybe that's not the guy that is going to just pick right up on whatever. Because when he started, maybe they didn't have that. And if you didn't start with that, then, it can be hard to pick up on midstream.
Yeah, so I'll answer that question. You don't have to ask me, but so when I got on the job and I was 24, right, I looked at the senior people as like giants. And holy crap, man. Even though so I came out of college, so a lot of them didn't come out of college. I was lucky because I came out of sports, and a lot of them were sports oriented, and also many military veterans. But I didn't have that gruffness, and I'm like, oh gosh, I'm with a bunch of my dad's friends, and my dad was a cop, and it was like I was semi comfortable, but not. They really didn't say a whole lot, but you proved yourself with nothing but action, no words. Don't tell me anything about what you did. Just friggin' do it, and don't complain. You learn that didn't go very far. As I got older, regardless of my rank, and I have 4 kids and they're all in their 20s, but I found myself looking at firefighters that came on the job in their 20s, almost like they're in their teens. I'm like, holy, is this person even old enough to be in a job? And even sometimes they're like 28 or 30 years old. I'm not saying that's right. I know that what I did, I had a tendency to judge. And I don't know if that's what the old timers did to me. Similarly, maybe a little bit different. Maybe I was more difficult on the younger generation when they came on than the old timers were with me. I'm not sure. But what I'm saying is that as I got older, I realized I had to accept the change that was happening because it was a different generation. And I didn't do that always smoothly. And I'm not telling everybody that you have to do that. But again, our conversation today is generations, and we're 25 years apart, but have had many conversations about the fire service. You coming from the military, you're very respectful of, as we would say, your elders, right? As myself and many people that you know in your career. But it's different, right? Because I know that when I was an officer, I looked at people, the younger ones, like with the EMT stuff and the paramedic stuff. I'm like, do your thing, man. Just do your thing. But from a mental health standpoint, I've always been in the mental health field since the 80s. But I can't say that I've always been understanding and supportive as much as I should be to the individuals as they're exposed to the numerous events that happen on the job. Part of that had to do, honestly, because of the way I was brought into the academy or into the fire service. And I'm like, I should treat them the same as I was treated, not in a bad way, but you do what you know. It wasn't until I really thought about how I interacted with people, and I've always been around assessing people's mental health. I've been a certified addictions counselor since 91. Like I said, I've been in behavioral health since 86. But from a mental health standpoint, like we started the conversation, the amount of runs, the fires definitely are down. The amount of injuries and deaths that you're exposed to is significantly more now than it was 30 years ago. I think you know that. How does this generation, how do you guys talk about that?
Yeah, I think that, from my own personal experience, being in the military and then coming on, and even when I started in the fire service, it was still that mentality of, the senior guys didn't really talk to you much. You were going to earn it, right? Be seen, not heard, 2 ears, one mouth, that whole thing. And so nowadays, I think that you still try to instill some of that because it's very complex, right? As to where with the newer generational, maybe they're not they're more welcoming from day one, and they're more, talkative, and they're more welcoming, which is okay, but still creating that high expectation. One thing that I do know that I have learned, maybe not always the easy way, and it certainly wasn't a linear path, is that in today, especially with the younger generation, is that it's okay to not be okay, right? As to where maybe in the past, and we talk about it all the time, it's, are you good? Yep, I'm good, right? And that was just that old school giant, like you mentioned, or the legend of the 55-year-old guy. You don't want to let him down, right? And you looked around at all those old guys, older guys, and it was like after a bad run, you're like, wow, those guys are all good. Well, dang, I guess I'm good too, right? As to where with the younger generation,
let's not forget about the fact that there were older women on the job too, but there weren't as many of them, so they were isolated.
Right.
So just from a population standpoint, we're including them.
Right. Older men, women, right? I think sometimes I use the word guys when I'm referencing all, but as to where now with the younger generation is a lot of these guys either have no problem telling you like, hey, this is bothering me, or my opinion is that you see it, right? Sometimes, older guys, or back in the day, it was real hard to read people. As to where now with the younger generation, you wear your emotions on your sleeve, facial expressions, your ability to have the mental fortitude to power through to the next call or the next assignment, right? Coming off the last bad run or bad job. Now it's easy. You can read it. And so I think as the fire service evolves, we're creating this culture of it's okay to not be okay, right? And it's okay to express that, as to where maybe that didn't happen before. And if it did, it was probably more sporadic here and there, right? But I think globally, that just wasn't something. And really, I'll take it a step further and say it was the same for the military, right? When I was a rookie in the military, we called them boots. When I was in the Marine Corps as an infantry guy, when you were the young guy and you're looking up to your senior guys and you're trying to prove yourself, it was you're a robot, you're a machine. And obviously I'm out now, but I talk to guys that are still in, and they have normalized the mental health piece of it, right? They have normalized that I'm not good culture. So I think it's, you're seeing it, which kind of goes back to the whole paramilitary thing.
So we've used the word mental health, right? Is that a favorable, unfavorable? Is that a good term? Our title is Mental Health Monthly. How do you think people receive that?
I think that in the past it was unfavorable. I think in the past you threw out the term mental health and people were like, oof, mental health, right? Same with PTSD. Oh, PTSD. But I think that now mental health, the term, everything about mental health is becoming favorable. I think the culture of mental health is becoming favorable. And I think if there is, a fire department out there or an organization out there that still has that mental health, like maybe they don't want to hear it, they don't like it, they're scared of it. I think that you almost have to take an inner look at what are we doing that's not allowing that term or that culture to be okay.
Yeah, I can tell you that throughout, and I ask people that. I know we're doing this show together. We're going to ask a lot of, we have and we will ask a lot of people that same question, because historically, when I've talked about that, or people have talked about it, and there's been trainings on that, it's inherently, the stigma is negative. Right. When you bring up the word mental health. And the same thing with being okay is in my 30-year career, I can't say that there's no way that I was 100% every single day, physically, mentally, or emotionally. I'd like to think that I could have been, but it's like sports with all of us, right? Is that you watch professional football and they're checking on people. There's no way everybody's 100% when they're going on that field. We would like to think that everybody that's a medic, a firefighter, an officer, whatever your title, rank, years of experience, what we're going to talk about, right, is overall mental health. And mental health is just a general term about our brain and our body, and actually what that means. I'm saying this not only, I'm not saying this to you, Chris, because you know that, but for anybody that's listening, this is our discussion. This is our platform. There was no platforms like this in the fire service, from a podcast or a webinar 10 years ago. There have been now, and people are out there that are talking about it. There's individuals that have podcasts, and thanks to fire engineering and editor-in-chief and education director David Rhodes, we're doing this, and we're going to continue to do this monthly. And so from my standpoint, from mental health, for anybody that's listening, is that it has to be okay to have a discussion about mental health and limit the stigma and the negativity around it, and have an open discussion about that. I mean, I don't know how many fire departments, and there's 35,000 fire departments across the country. I think there's 18,000 law enforcement agencies across the nation. A lot of police do psychological testing. I don't know if that's good or bad. I'm not going to get into that debate, but maybe another day we can. Some departments do that. But from a mental health standpoint, it's the same thing with what we put in our bodies to eat today to make us sustain our ability to go to do what we need to do and to feel good. It's no different in the sense of what we see, what we smell, what we taste, what we touch, and what we hear, all the senses, and how we can manage our overall mental and behavioral health throughout one's career. I don't know if I was standing on a soapbox right there.
I think it's good. And I think something else that's worth discussing for a second is, we were talking about your generation, my generation, right? Two totally different generations. And if you look at the fire service, in my opinion, it's starting to become majority of that millennial generation, right? I mean, obviously you retired, guys you hired in with have already retired, or they're getting close to that point, right? And so now you're starting to see this shift of your senior guys are starting to become that millennial generation. And I think the guys from maybe your generation or others that are still left, if you were to ask me, they owe it to the next generation to take the lessons learned and, whether good, bad, or ugly, especially in the realm of mental health, and pass it along to the next one. Because we do it with everything else. We do it with fire strategies. We do it with tactics. We do it with rescue, right? We do it with EMS. I mean, EMS is always evolving, but has there ever really been, right, this pass on of mental health? And so I think that is really important. And, maybe when if you walked into a firehouse 20 years ago and you said, hey guys, you had a bad run, we're going to bring in peer support, they'd probably look at you and laugh at you, maybe call you a few choice words and tell you that you're crazy, right? But I don't want to promise you, but I would like to think, and I've seen it myself, Now you walk into a firehouse that's predominantly millennial and you say, hey, I know you guys had a bad run just now. We got peer support on the way. They go, okay, cool. Do they want to stay for lunch? Because we're cooking. You know what I mean? And so that is something that you have to stay ahead of. And I think that's comes down to the individual, to the company officer, the battalion chiefs, all the way up to the fire chief, right? The organization is changing. We don't, people will say we don't fight fire the same way today that we did 60 years ago, right? We shouldn't be attacking mental health the same way today that we attacked it 60 years ago, if there even was an attack on it.
Well, we're supposed to be higher education, learning beings, right? So, your last statement is true, right? Things don't stay the same. We have to evolve, just like we talked about from the EMS world, right? All the things that you have to do on that rig for people. It's the same thing we should do for ourselves with the exposures that we have from and again, not just talking from an EMS standpoint, but just from an overall, what a firefighter has to do, right? You have to be, right. You have to pretty much know how to do everything, right? That's why they call it 911.
Yeah, I like to say jack of all trades, master of none, which, I mean, I use that jokingly because you can be a master. But the cool thing about mental health and really buying into it is the fact that it can touch every element of the job that you're responsible for, like you just mentioned, right? The fire side of it, the rescue side of it, the EMS side of it, the community side of it. And so, maybe you go on a bad run and it had nothing to do with EMS. Maybe you just couldn't make the grab. Mental health affects it. Maybe you're on the ambulance the next call and it doesn't even have to be a critical call, right? It could just be a bad family dynamic situation that you are called out to. Mental health touches it, right? And so every single day, mental health is happening. And I know we're going to get into it more down the road and stuff, but the mental health doesn't only affect you when you show up every third day or for your tour or whatever that looks like, right? Compound that with what's going on at home. That's a whole, now you really, you got family, you got kids, you got outside jobs, because we know every fireman has an outside job, right? All these different things compounded with the responsibilities of the job.
Yeah, we're more than just a firefighter, right? You got family. You're a dad, right? You're a husband. I am as well.
Yeah.
Maybe down the road I'll be a grandfather, and continue to learn on this whole mental health standpoint. So I want to be clear. I think we did talk about this in the sense that this mental health monthly conversation is going to be a variety of different things that is going to be directed more from a positivity standpoint and from an ability standpoint, and include generational changes so that people can be prepared and capable to sustain a long and quality life and career in the fire service. I went to work for 30 years, and while I had some tough days, never a bad day, because I was going to work in a job that I loved, and I loved it every single day. Curious if in your 15 years, that's the same mentality.
Oh yeah. Did I have off days? Yeah. Did I have hard days? Sure. But did I just ever have a bad day where I was like, I don't want to do this job anymore? And the answer is no, because every time I went to work, it was a new day. Right. And I also think that, growing up going to the military, and then even when I was in school outside the military, doing hard jobs, right? Manual labor down here in the Texas summer. I think that plays into it, right? Knowing what the alternate was, right? And you're like, man, this was a hard day, but it sure beats doing X, or it sure beats Y. So I think that, no, I never just had a day where I didn't want to do it, but I also knew I was in it for the right reasons.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I don't think I've ever said anything to you about this. Is that I remember I knew nobody in the fire service when I got in a job. I knew nothing about the calendar, shift work, daily days, what color days, whatever. It's like, holy cow, they gave me this calendar. And we were driving to the firehouse after the academy. And I didn't even know if we worked 8 hours, 12 hours. And I understand there's different shift work. We were 24/48. And, I didn't do the math. And I said, what is all this stuff? Well, your first shift. I'm like, so wait, so it's 1, 2, 3, red, blue, and black. That's how we did it. And I said, so what does that mean? He goes, you go to work on those ones and red days. And I'm looking at it in a month and I'm like, but that's only like 8 days. And the guy's like, yeah. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he goes, yeah. And then there's these letters, A, B, C, D, E. We used to have F, but we only have 5 now. He goes, you got a daily. And I said, what the hell does that mean? And he's like, well, you're off that thing. I said, come on. There's no way you're setting me up, man. That's crazy. I just came from a job that, I was working almost every day, not making as much. And again, we didn't make a ton of money back then. But I'm like, you're telling me I only work the ones that are red and the alphabet that doesn't include an A. Yeah, I might. I hit the freaking lottery. I already knew I hit the lottery getting on the job. I don't care what department you get on. I just, again, from my generation, I didn't know that. And it ended up being 86 days out of the year because of our daily day in our shifts. And then we got about 15 years ago, we got what's called the dinosaur day after 25 years. So you only worked 85 days out of the year. Anyhow, it just, again, from a mental health standpoint, yeah, we worked 24-hour shifts, and there were days in my career we had no runs, and there's days where I only got to sit down for a half hour. We all know that. But when you get those 2 days off, there should be some intentionality in a sense of recovery, right? You run a marathon, you got to have recovery. Yeah. You're stressed out. You got to do your parasympathetic and rest and digest. Working out is fine. Running is fine, but there's got to be some way that you can rest and recover and repair, not just from a muscle mass, but from your brain. I didn't know that for a good portion of my career because it was just go, go, go. What's the mentality now? Because you guys just switched to McKinney to a little bit ago, 4896, right?
Yeah, January 1st. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's right now, I think that people are trying to kind of figure out what that 4-day off balance looks like. I think when, it's a 24/48, I think the senior guys, they had their 48 hours off dialed in pretty well. But I think with the younger guys, and, this is something that we have to be aware of and try to address is that 48, they're just so excited to be on the job, right? Kind of like you said, everybody remembers being a rookie on the job. You just want to go and you want to make runs and you want to do all this stuff. And then when you're off, you just want to go, 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 right? Life is good. You got a good job. You're making good money. And so when your day's off, you want to enjoy it and celebrate it. And so I think that's something where you have to, and I did not learn this the easy way, but you have to find that pace. You have to find that balance, and you almost have to be a little bit selfish for yourself in a sense of, I'm going to take care of myself. Like you mentioned, of course you want to work out and you want to go hang out with your friends, and you want to go to the ball game and all this stuff. But what does it look like taking care of yourself? Because obviously I did not make a lot of money when I hired on, even as a firefighter paramedic. The pay back then was about half, maybe a little less than what it is now for a rookie coming on the job. And so, I worked part-time at this hospital and I worked part-time at this fire department, and then I became a flight medic and, trying to support my wife and kids. And it was just go, 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 go. And then eventually, your body says, I'm out, whether it be physical, mental, or both. Right. So yeah, I think that's the key, is finding that balance. Cause I don't know how it was up there in Chicago in those areas, but I know down here 9 out of 10 firemen have a part-time job. Right. And so, you're essentially working, a lot of guys are quote unquote working 2 full-time jobs, but it's like, when do we have a break for ourselves, and what does recovery look like for ourselves? And we've put such a stigma on mental health in the past that, I will tell you, with the younger generation, one thing that I see quite a bit, and in my own experience, and we'll get into it someday on the show, is, like going to a counselor, right? You see the, senior guys, right? Some of the senior guys, or even myself, 15 years, I have no problem going to a counselor. I have no problem advertising I'm going to see a counselor, right? I do it weekly. Yeah, I think you know that. But you maybe have a 22, 23-year-old guy on the job who's young, and you make a bad run or a series of bad runs, and you're like, hey man, why don't you go see the count? I'm good. And that's what you hear. And it's almost like a broken record. I'm good until it's not. And that guy winds up in a crisis.
Yeah, I think there's more discussion now than there was definitely back when, I got so kudos to your generation and the current generation that is willing to go that route. I don't know if I don't think it's 50% of the population. There was informal peer support. There wasn't really formal peer support. There was CISM after a critical incident. But from a proactive standpoint, there really wasn't throughout the country the conversation. And certainly nobody would give two people like us or anybody the platform to talk about mental health in a monthly platform, right? Just get in there, buckle your chin strap and get in.
Yeah.
Well, we covered a lot of different things from. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was just going to say, I want to be clear in saying that I'm not saying that, the older generations or the 100 years of firefighting before my time did it wrong or didn't get it right. I just think that times are changing, right? Like we've talked about, frequency of events, frequency of high acuity calls, responsibility, right? I think you made that pretty clear, whether it be firefighting, rescue, EMS, community involvement, right? The fire service is different today than it was back then. So there's nothing saying that those guys didn't do it right or they didn't do a good job. It's just completely different shift. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, no, good discussion. Again, we've talked about different generations, the EMS skill set, the personnel that are coming on the job, the hours change, mental health in general, people's perception of mental health. Are you okay? A lot of different things. Again, thanks to fire engineering and current editor in chief and educational director, Chief David Rhodes, my former buddy Bobby Halton, who was in those positions before, that allowed me to do stuff with Hump Day Hangout. And with this platform, we're going to continue to have these discussions. So thanks for joining us today. Out of curiosity, Chris, what's the temperature in Texas right now?
Oh, it's pretty cold. We're not in a good place. We are not okay. 24 degrees. We're not okay.
We're not above zero yet. So whenever this airs, people will remember that cold air that came across the country and got all of us. So,
yeah,
Chris, always good to see you. Till next time.
You too.
Fire Engineering Nation. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.
Breathing in diesel exhaust fumes is like walking into a fire without a mask. Over time, those toxins lead to cancer. Protect yourself with MagneGrip, the easiest, most reliable exhaust removal system that features a true 100% seal to eliminate diesel exhaust fumes. To get free grant assistance, visit MagneGrip.com.